Hello. I'm hoping the audio is working. Please let me know if it's not. I saw some strange things going on here that maybe indicated the audio was not playing nicely. But hi, welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. One second, let me. You hear the audio? There we go. So this is our ongoing midweek series on the book of Isaiah. We are up to chapters, hopefully tonight we're going to get through chapters 36 and 37. It will be hopefully we'll be able to get it all in. I certainly hope so. So yeah, it's been, we're probably about halfway there through the book, a little over halfway. So we're making progress. As always, please make use of the YouTube chat box to ask any questions you might have, any clarifications, anything that you see in the text that I didn't point out. Bring it up. Would love to get your input, and again, the back and forth definitely makes this more interesting. So, let's see, where are we? There we go, and let's just get right into it. All right, Isaiah 36. Now, what we're moving into is a new section of Isaiah. Okay, so basically, if you open up your Bible and go to Isaiah 35, and pretty much almost everything before that, you'll see that it's the format. Usually, how they've rendered it in these Bibles is that they'll render it kind of in a poetic format, because these are all prophecies, oracles that Isaiah is giving. So they do have kind of a almost lyrical kind of quality to them, poetry, sort of poetic language. So they're rendered a little bit differently. And then when you go from 35 to 36, and you see in chapter 36, it's now in full paragraph form, just normal kind of thing, because we are kind of moving on from this prophetic oracle kind of stuff into more of an ongoing narrative, as Isaiah is recording what is going on. So we're going to get into a little bit different stuff. The way he writes, what he's writing, and what we're going through. So, first three verses, Isaiah 36, 1 through 3. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. And the king of Assyria sent to Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem with a great army. And he stood by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. And there came out to him Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, and Shebna the secretary, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder. Okay, so moving on from all of the woes and the oracles, we get what is happening with Assyria invading Judah. So Assyria has years ago destroyed Israel, taken Samaria, exiled all the people, and now they've moved on to Judah, and they're approaching Jerusalem, threatening to lay siege to Jerusalem, and King Hezekiah is freaking out. Basically, as we move on here, we're going to see, well, maybe we don't need to talk about that. So, the previous chapter, how we ended, was Isaiah was talking about a holy highway, essentially, how on the day of the Lord that he will raise up a highway in the desert and places, and there will be peace and prosperity. There's no predators, no lions or anything creeping around this highway. It's the road to Zion that is filled with hope and promise and joy, and it was a very uplifting kind of like, yes, and this is what God will do. So we move from that to chapter 36, where it's like, and now back to the present time, where the roads are treacherous. All the highways in Judah have now been taken over by Assyria. Assyria has come in, and every city they encounter, they attack, they conquer, and so city after city has been falling to Assyria, and the roads are treacherous, and then everything's cut off. So things are not good, to say the least. So Assyria is on the move. Judah is no match for Assyria. I mean, they really do not have anything to to go on the offensive with that would really be of any consequence. Their defenses weren't holding. The cities were just dropping all over the place. Wherever Assyria went, they took over. So it's kind of this unstoppable juggernaut. And so what has been going on while Assyria is kind of marching to Jerusalem here, Hezekiah is been trying to prepare. He's been doing everything he could to prepare for this, what he expects to be a long siege of Jerusalem. Excuse me. So he had blocked off the spring outside of Jerusalem to cut off the water going to there, although he dug a tunnel. He dug a tunnel through the limestone of Jerusalem to bring water to the city, be an alternate method to be able to keep water from coming in a safe way, but also to prevent the publicly accessible water from coming in for them to do anything nasty with it or whatever. So he's fortifying Jerusalem. He repaired the walls. He built towers. He built more walls. He ordered the creation of more weapons and shields. He's really getting ready to hunker down. And the idea is that maybe, just maybe, they can outlast the Assyrian assault. I mean, that's the strategy that he's going with. It's not to go on the offensive. It's not anything other than maybe they'll get tired of attacking us. Not a good plan. And the reason why he's prepared for a long siege is that it took the Assyrians about 3 years to conquer Samaria. Okay, so they were able to withstand it for about 3 years, which, to be constantly under siege is just incredible. Can't even imagine that kind of a constant sort of, that's just their life for 3 years. And, living here in America, we're afforded the luxury of not knowing what it is to be constantly under threat like that. But it just, that's all they've got. Okay, so and Sennacherib's plan is to isolate Jerusalem. Okay, he's conquering all the areas around, so he's closing in on them, and he has set up camp near Lachish, southwest of Jerusalem. And Hezekiah had sent a message to Sennacherib saying, and this is recorded in 2 Kings 18:14, where he says, "I have done wrong, withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will bear." Essentially saying, name your price, I will pay it for you to go away. So whatever you want, I'll give it to you. Just leave us alone. So what Hezekiah did was he took out all the silver in the temple. He emptied out the royal treasuries. He stripped the gold from the doors and the doorposts of the temple and took all of this and gave it to Assyria, sent it to Sennacherib. The result being that Jerusalem became very poor. I mean, they gave up all their riches, and the Assyrians became very rich, and they were still going to attack. Hezekiah thought that by offering this bribe, this negotiation, that maybe the Assyrians would say, "Oh, okay, well you paid us off, so we'll leave." No, they're taking the money and they're going to attack. So that's kind of the background for what we get here. Now, there is something interesting going on here where, so the king of Assyria sent Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem with a great army. So he stood by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. All right, the road to the washer's field, or the highway to the washer's field, is significant because 30 years prior to this, Isaiah met Ahaz at that exact same spot. He came to Ahaz to discuss the threat against Jerusalem, but this is from the dual power of Israel and Syria. Israel and Aram. Those were the threats for back then, so 30 years previous to that. And what Isaiah told Ahaz at that point was, trust in God. God will deliver you. What did Ahaz do? He chose not to trust in the Lord, but rather he turned to Assyria for their defense. He decided to align himself with Assyria to defend Judah, Jerusalem, against Israel and Syria. So it is definitely not with any small amount of irony that 30 years before that, Isaiah and Ahaz met in this one spot where Ahaz decided to turn to Assyria for help. And now 30 years later, Assyria has now become the superpower in the world. And now they're meeting Hezekiah there to discuss, what the fate of Judah is going to be. So we have this moment where, everything that God warned them about through Isaiah. God had told them through Isaiah that you're not King Ahaz. You're not this is gonna come back and bite you. You cannot be in league with these guys. Trust in the Lord your God. Ahaz said no, and now Assyria is here to take over. So this is kind of a disaster 30 years in the making, and all built upon the stubborn refusal to trust in the Lord. So that's what we've got going on here. So that sets the stage for everything that's going to happen. So verses 4 through 10. And the Rabshakeh said to them, "Say to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, on what do you rest this trust of yours? Do you think that mere words are strategy and power for war? In whom do you trust, that you have rebelled against me? Behold, you are trusting in Egypt, that broken reed of a staff, which will pierce the hand of any man who leans on it. Such is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed, saying to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar? Come now, make a wager with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses, if you are able on your part to set riders on them. How then can you repulse a single captain among the least of my master's servants, when you trust in Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? Moreover, is it without the Lord that I have come up against this land to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up and against this land and destroy it." Okay, so this is one of the high commanders of the Assyrian force here, who is speaking to the delegation, the delegation from Jerusalem who have gone out to discuss these things. And he basically gives 5 arguments of why, let me go back here, why Judah is just, they have no hope. First he says, your strategy is empty. He says, on what do you rest your trust of yours? Do you think that mere words and strategy and power for war? That everything Hezekiah has tried, to negotiate, to bribe them is nothing. If that's his strategy, then it's pointless. It is, what did you honestly think that would work? Second, he talks about Egypt, and he says, look, we know you're trusting in Egypt. They're not going to help you. They're nothing. They used to be something, but not anymore. Egypt is completely untrustworthy. You're not going to be able to trust in them. All right. Number 3. He basically says, your Lord God, Yahweh, will not help you. And it's really interesting. All right. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed? Okay, so he talks about, he's suggesting that Hezekiah has profaned his own God. So basically what the commander is saying is like, look, we know what Hezekiah has done. We've heard the stories. We know that he went out and destroyed all the altars and the high places and said, no, you can't worship God there. You can only worship him in the temple. And so in his mind, what Hezekiah had done must have upset his God, Yahweh. Clearly, how can you trust in your God when you have profaned him yourself? Now, the difference there is that Hezekiah, what the commander is talking about are all the religious forms that Hezekiah had enacted, which was to purify the temple, to celebrate the Passover, to go out and destroy all the false altars, all the altars to false idols, all the high places where people were worshiping false idols. He had them all destroyed. So basically what Hezekiah was doing was calling the people to repentance, actually preparing them to worship God the way they were supposed to. So in Hezekiah's and our perception or understanding what he was doing was it was a good thing. He was actually doing something pleasing to God. But the commander doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand Yahweh. And so all he can see is that Isaiah has destroyed all these altars. So, of course, your God is going to be pissed off at you. He's going to be upset. He's not going to help you because you destroyed all of his altars. So he doesn't quite get it. So there's that. Then he talks about the military might of Judah is no match. That he kind of taunts Hezekiah a bit by saying, look, I'll give you 2,000 horses. I don't even think you can find 2,000 men to ride these horses. But you know what? I'm going to give you 2,000 horses, and even with that, even if we offer you 2,000 of our finest horses, and you are able to find fighters to ride them, you wouldn't even be able to beat one of our lowest captains. A single Assyrian soldier, you wouldn't be able to beat him with these 2,000 horses that we give you. So he's just like totally breaking them down and trashing them and saying like you have no hope here. And then ultimately, in verse 10, he says, "Moreover, your God has told us to destroy you. Your God has said, go up against this land and destroy it." Now, you can, the way we kind of understand this is like, well, God has used the Assyrians as a instrument of his judgment. We go back in Isaiah, and it talks about God using the Assyrians to bring judgment upon Israel. And that's exactly what God did. God had foretold about the Assyrian assault on Judah. So God already had this kind of in motion. So we read this and we say, well, okay, he's right. He's not wrong. But just the way he says it seems to be like, okay, so did he hear the prophecies? I mean, how does he know this? Because he probably wouldn't have, been privy to the prophecies that Isaiah was giving to the king and the court and all this. So what's going on there? What's more likely than that is that he probably is just applying his understanding of how God's work, and essentially that they have experienced such great success so far in their assaults on Judah that every town they go into, they conquer it. Like, boom, no resistance whatsoever. So in his understanding, basically he's saying, oh, so their God, Yahweh, he must want us here. They must have upset him so bad that he is giving this people over to us. So that's really most likely where he is coming from in saying this. So basically he's saying like, hey, the Lord your God told us to come in and take over. Now, whether God actually, audibly spoke to him and directed him, we don't have anything to suggest that whatsoever. So we wouldn't assume that. But we can make an assumption based on how they would have understood the actions or how they perceive the actions of national gods, is that if you were experiencing a victory over your enemy, that was what was likely going on was your enemy's God had abandoned them or had given them over to you. So that's how that would have played out for them. So this is probably where it's coming from. At any rate, he's just attacking them at every possible thing. Like, your words won't save you, your might won't save you, your God won't save you, over and over. And he's just trying to completely demoralize the people. And, and this is what, this is where the people are. They're like, this is what they're hearing. And the trick is going to be, are they going to hear this and melt away, or are they going to hear this and trust in God? And this is where, the lesson, if you want to say for us from this text, what we can glean from it for our own lives, is when we are face to face with opposition, death, destruction, trial, and affliction. And that's what we see in front of us. And we know God has promised to protect us, to deliver us. But what we see is like, I don't see how. This is hopeless. Are we going to live by what we see or live by faith? Are we going to trust in God to be true to his word? or are we going to abandon God and say, well, this is trouble, so I'm going to have to do the best I can, and I'm going to take over now? That's the position that Hezekiah is being placed in right here. All right, and before we stop for a question or two, then Eliakim, Shebna, and Joah said to the Rabshakeh, "Please speak to your servants in Aramaic, for we understand it. Do not speak to us in the language of Judah within the hearing of the people who are on the wall." But the Rabshakeh said, "Has my master sent me to speak these words to your master and to you, and not to the men sitting on the wall, who are doomed with you to eat their own dung and drink their own urine?" Yay! So basically, they're having this discussion. There are men of Judah, Jerusalem, lined up again on the walls surrounding. So armies. A lot of the men of Judah are there, and they can overhear what is being discussed. And so the Jerusalem delegation says, like, "Hey, stop speaking in Hebrew because these guys can hear you. Speak in Aramaic. We understand that, and we don't want them to overhear this." And the Assyrian commander is like, "Oh, really?" And he's like, "Look, they're going to hear this. What are you afraid of? Because they're going to hear about it now, or they're going to know about it later. But these men sitting on your walls are doomed to be destroyed. That they're not going to have food or drink. They're going to be eating their own feces and urine. And so this is all part of the Assyrian tactic to just, again, demoralize the troops, to get them to not even put up a fight, to see how hopeless the situation is, so to just make the conquest that much easier for them. So this is all part of their intimidation tactic. All right, I'll pause right there. Any questions so far? I mean, it's all pretty much straightforward. Like I said, this is more of a narrative section here, so there's not too much to and this is the symbolism behind this. It's more of just the background. So, any questions before we move on? Awfully quiet out there. All right. I don't see any popping up, which means I can continue, and then there will be a question that pops up real quick. So, let's just bring it on. Okay, verses 13 through 20. Then the Rabshakeh stood and called out in a loud voice in the language of Judah, in Hebrew, "Hear the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you. Do not let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord by saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, make your peace with me and come out to me. Then each one of you will eat of his own vine and each one of his own fig tree, and each one of you will drink the water of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of grain and wine, a land of bread and vineyards. Beware, lest Hezekiah mislead you by saying, the Lord will deliver us. Has any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Who among all the gods of these lands have delivered their lands out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand?" All right, so continues to try to intimidate the people by offering three-part attempt to undermine their faith in God. So first he says, let's go back. All right, your hope in the Lord is a delusion. He basically says, don't let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord. Hezekiah will tell you, if you trust in God, he will deliver you. It's not going to happen. I mean, he doesn't really offer anything. He just flat out says, it's not going to happen. Oh, we have a question here. Was Assyria taking over just for the heck of it? Not because Jerusalem was any great prize? I mean, that's what that's what empires do. They take over. um, I mean, what was there's certainly. I mean, each place has various uh, advantages, strategic or otherwise. I mean, even if an area of land is nothing special but has some decent farmland, I mean that's enough for somebody to come in and say, oh, well, that could be useful, and just want to invade and take it over. So certainly Judah and Jerusalem did have qualities that would make it attractive for conquest. But I mean, this is just what empires did and do. I mean, honestly, that's kind of that's the thing, is they expand, they take over. The people of Israel. And you can kind of see in this, what is the plan here is to take the people and to move them, to ship them out of Israel or Judah, and resettle them, to prop up their empire, their economy. I mean, these are working bodies who can be plugged in to feed the machine. So, it's all it's expansion by force. So, that's pretty much what's going on here. He says there's no point in trusting God. He can't save you. He offers an alternate. Hezekiah is going to say either fight or trust in God. The Assyrian commander is saying, here's an option. Make peace with the king of Assyria. And what he means by make peace is surrender. Okay, it's not really make peace. And he phrases it. He says, make your peace, and then each one of you, you eat of your own vine, each of your own fig tree. You'll drink the water of your own cisterns. Nothing's going to change. You'll still have all your stuff. You'll have your land. You can do your own thing. It'll be great. And then, asterisk, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land. So until we come for you. You'll be fine. You don't need to worry about anything until we come in. We forcefully remove you from your land and repopulate you elsewhere. And he tries to, make it sound like, it's not a big deal, because it'll be like a land like your own, a land of grain and wine, of bread and vineyards. You'll love it. So it's kind of, I mean, it's not a good deal, but especially for the people of Judah, because the whole thing about the land that they were in, where they were, is that this was the land promised to them by God. And a big part of this promise, why this land was important to them and their heritage, is because this was the land through which the Messiah would come. Okay, I've mentioned this all the time in whenever we study the Old Testament or Revelation or whatever. The promise of the land was not like, okay, here's a little geographic, strip of land that will be yours forever, and yay, and that's it. It's just about the land. It wasn't about that. It was about, this is the land where I'm placing you, where my temple will be, and from this area, from this location right here, this is where the Messiah will be born. This is where the Messiah will die. And this is where he'll rise again. And this is where he'll ascend into heaven. I mean, it was all focused on Jesus. So for them, I mean, this is a non-starter. Because the whole idea, even if the land was functionally the same, looked the same, had the same qualities, was ripe with for grain and vineyards and all that, it wouldn't matter, because the promise of the Messiah was attached to this whole area and was given to them. So for them to say, like, oh, it's going to be the same, it's like, no, because you can't replicate this covenant. You can't replicate this promise. This is what God has given to us and what he has promised to us. So it's a non-starter. It's just like, well, it's not going to help. And then finally, he says, the third argument, I guess, is no God has ever helped anybody against the Assyrians. And he lists off all these nations that they have conquered and said, the God of this nation did nothing. The God of this nation did nothing. The God of this nation did nothing. Interesting thing is he points out Samaria. Says, oh, the God of Samaria did nothing. Ah, who's the God of Samaria or Israel? Yahweh. He's about to do something. So there's a lot of that. But you could even look at that and say, well, the God of Samaria, well, they had rejected God, Yahweh. So, if we're referring to Yahweh as the God of Samaria, well, then we can explain that. But referring to any of the false gods that they had turned to, well, then there you go. It's the same with all the rest here. So this is pretty dire stuff, serious stuff. And they were silent and answered him not a word, for the king's command was, do not answer him. Then Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, and Shebna the secretary, and Joah the son of Asaph, the recorder, came to Hezekiah with their clothes torn, and told him the words of the Rabshakeh. All right. So the commander gives all this, and it is threatening, taunting, mocking, whatever. And nobody said a word. Nobody answered anything. Partly because the king said, do not answer him. So this is actually kind of a good thing. They're being obedient. They're listening to their king. They're following orders. Good. But can also see that, you can also read into this that they are holding, that they have faith in God, that they know that they can trust him. Is another reasonable assumption, given what's going to happen next. See, up until this point, and be like, are they trusting in God? When you see what Hezekiah does, it'll be a little bit easier to see. And then the delegation returns. They've torn their clothes, which is, usually that's like kind of a either, tearing your clothes. It's an expression of, extreme emotion, of horror, of disgust, whatever. So this is a desperate situation, so at the end of the chapter, Assyria has made their threats, has stripped them of any hope of reprieve, have laid out just how bad it is for them, and they're left in a terrible situation. The treasury is emptied, nothing has changed. The best case scenario out of all this is the people of Judah will be deported. And their land will be stripped from them, and they will never return. Best case scenario at this point. So it's looking pretty bad for the people of Judah. All right. Any questions before we get into chapter 37? That's just kind of setting the stage. So anything jump out at you? Anything you want clarified? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Don't see anything. All right. Cool. All right. Well, let us move on then. And I think this 37 is a bit of a longer chapter, but I think there's less that we're going to really talk about because it moves pretty quick. So I think 15 minutes. We'll be fine. Great. All right. Verses 1 through 4, chapter 37. As soon as King Hezekiah heard it, he tore his clothes, and covered himself with sackcloth, and went into the house of the Lord. And he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, and Shebna the secretary, and the senior priests, covered with sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah the son of Amos. They said to him, Thus says Hezekiah, This day is a day of distress, of rebuke, and of disgrace. Children have come to the point of birth, and there is no strength to bring them forth. It may be that the Lord your God will hear the words of Rabshakeh, whom his master the king of Assyria has sent to mock the living God, and will rebuke the words that the Lord your God has heard. Therefore lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left. All right, Hezekiah he's got one option. Turn to the Lord. And he does. He does. This is a great moment right here. He hears what Assyria has said. He tears his own clothes, covers himself with sackcloth, which is a a symbol of repentance, of contrition, and he goes into the temple. So he's approaching. So he goes to God's house in repentance, in sorrow, in shame, in guilt. He's basically coming to, I, a poor miserable sinner, Lord have mercy. This is what he's coming down to. Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. And then sends these others covered with sackcloth to the prophet Isaiah. And he says, he says right here, the cool thing is that, what Hezekiah points out is not, he doesn't point to and say like, hey, tell Yahweh that his people are in danger, that his temple is in danger. He doesn't focus on that. Instead, his concern is that the commander of Assyria has ridiculed Yahweh, that he has mocked the one true God, that he has profaned his name. And so basically he's, and the Assyrians have made Yahweh out to be no better than any of the false gods of the nation. So Hezekiah is saying like, this man has what do I want to say? Profaned, I already said that. Blasphemed? Whatever. Anyway, this man has mocked you and your name. Are you going to let that stand? And he points to the remnant. He says, therefore, lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left. Now, this whole remnant idea is a very strong theme throughout all of Isaiah. Isaiah always refers back to this remnant, and usually when he's talking about it, he's talking about that out of all the unfaithful masses, there is always this remnant who God will preserve. That though the world goes to hell in a handbasket, God will preserve his people, this remnant that he will bring through it all into his promise and his salvation. So it could be that Hezekiah is referring to the remnant that Isaiah always refers to, but more likely he's just referring to Jerusalem, which is kind of if he's not taking Isaiah's lead and talking about the remnant as Isaiah speaks of it, it's kind of a fun little connection here that he would himself speak about a remnant, but he's referring to Jerusalem and the people who are left. That Assyria has just blitzkrieged the nation and taken over so much that Jerusalem is one of the few places left, so they are the remnant. It just works perfectly in with Isaiah's speaking of the remnant, so it's just like a nice little confluence of those things. All right, verses 5 through 8. When the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, say to your master, say to the king, thus says the Lord, do not be afraid because of the words that you have heard, with which the young men of the king of Assyria have reviled me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, so that he shall hear a rumor and return to his own land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own land. The Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria fighting against Libnah, for he had heard that the king had left Lachish. Yeah. So, what we have here is Isaiah has a word of comfort and hope for Hezekiah, and it starts with, do not be afraid. Always a good way to start. Do not be afraid. God is in charge. God is in control. God will not make this happen or let this happen. Don't worry about what they have said against God. God has the final word. God is not mocked. He will bring judgment down upon them. And he says, I'll put a spirit in the king of in Sennacherib, to send him home. He'll return to his land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own land. So it won't be in battle. It won't be in conquest. It will be in his own home, in his own the safety of his own land. So God will be the one to bring vengeance and judgment upon them. And then we get a little bit of information. So the commander returns and finds that the king of Assyria has now moved in against Libnah. So they've already conquered Lachish, and now they're in Libnah. So he's advancing on Jerusalem. So God gives Hezekiah, or God through Isaiah gives Hezekiah the good news that God will take care of this, while Assyria is advancing. So again, you can live by sight or by faith, because we've got two seemingly contradictory things. God says, nope, you're going to be okay, but what you can see is you're not going to be okay. So which is it going to be? Are you going to trust in God? Or are you going to trust in what you can see? So again, that's kind of the underlying theme here. Verses 9 through 13. Now the king heard concerning Tirhakah, king of Cush. He has set out to fight against you. And when he heard it, he sent messengers to Hezekiah, saying, Thus shall you speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah. Do not let your God, in whom you trust, deceive you by promising that Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all lands, devoting them all to destruction. And shall you be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them, the nations that my fathers destroyed? Gozan, Haran, Rezeph, and the people of Eden who were in the Telassar? Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arpad, the king of the city of Severavim, the king of Henna, or the king of Ivah? All right, so a little bit of a wrinkle in the proceedings here is the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, here's a report that Egypt is on the move. Egypt, who he mocked and said, "Oh, they're not going to be any help." The king of Cush, Egypt is moving, and they're advancing to meet Assyria to take them on. So it's, even though Assyria has kind of discounted the might of Egypt, it raises some questions, and so they double down, talking to the people of Judah, or sending this message again, saying, "Look, don't trust in your God. He's not going to save you. Just give up already." And then he goes through a longer list of the nations whose gods have failed them. So it's interesting things going on. That something is happening, and Assyria is seems like they're a little bit shaken, or at least interesting development. All right, comment. At this time, was Jerusalem a fortified city? Didn't it have a big wall around it? Yes. In fact, Hezekiah built some additional walls too, to further protect them. So yes, it was a fortified city, very much so. Okay, cool. So things are changing. Okay. Here we go. Verses 14 through 20. 14 through 20? Yes. Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers, and read it. And Hezekiah went up to the house of the Lord, and spread it before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made the heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see. And hear all the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste all the nations and their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire. For they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Excuse me. Therefore they were destroyed. So now, O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord. All right. So Hezekiah, he did what a believer has to do. What a believer must do in the face of trial and affliction. He turned to God in prayer. I mean, it's his only option, and he does, and he offers this wonderful prayer, seeking deliverance for his people, and saying that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord, so that everybody knows that you are God, so everyone turns to you. So I mean, and definitely he is thinking deliverance, protection, and all that, but in a way so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord, so that they would turn and they would glorify you. So it's this kind of has a theme of yes, protect us, yes, defend us, turn the hearts of our enemies so they may worship you too. It's a wonderful prayer. And he gets right to it. He's like, you alone are God. And the cool thing is he says here, okay, so he extols God. You alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You made heaven and earth. But I love this prayer because it's just so honest. And he says, look, the kings of Assyria have laid waste to all the nations. Yes, it's bad, Lord. Yeah. He doesn't he doesn't go to God and say, like, Lord, give me strength because, though all I can see is how bad it is, but I know it's not the case. It isn't this bad, so I should trust in you. It's like, no, that's not an honest prayer. He says, God, this is really bad. This is horrible. The reality is this nation has conquered everyone. They've laid waste. And this is bad, God. Okay? And he doesn't say, give me the strength to overcome this. He says, Lord, you are the one. May it be in your hands. That you fight this fight according to your will, according to your promise, according to glorify your name, so that all may see and know that you are God. Great prayer. Very, very honest and just very to the point. All right. And then we have God's response. This is a good one. Then Isaiah the son of Amoz sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. All right. So this is God's response to Assyria. Well, I mean, he's talking to... This is a response to Hezekiah concerning Assyria. Okay. Because you have prayed to me concerning Sennacherib, king of Assyria, this is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning him. She despises you. She scorns you, the virgin daughter of Zion. She wags her head behind you, the daughter of Jerusalem. Whom have you mocked and reviled? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes to the heights? Against the Holy One of Israel. By your servants you have mocked the Lord, and you have said, With my many chariots I have gone up to the heights of the mountains, to the far recesses of Lebanon, to cut down its tallest cedars, its choicest cypress, to come to its remotest height, its most fruitful forest. I dug wells and drank waters to dry up with the sole of my foot all the streams of Egypt. Have you not heard that I determined it long ago? I planned from days of old what now I bring to pass, that you should make fortified cities crash into heaps of ruins, while their inhabitants shorn of strength are dismayed and confounded, and have become like plants of the field, and like tender grass, like grass on the housetops, blighted before it is grown. I know you're sitting down, and you're going out and coming in, and you're raging against me. Because you have raged against me, and your complacency has come to my ears, I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will turn you back on the way by which you came. And this shall be the sign for you. This year you shall eat what grows of itself, and in the second year what springs from that. Then in the third year sow and reap, and plant vineyards, and eat their fruit. And a surviving remnant of the house of Judah shall again take root downward, and bear fruit upward. For out of Jerusalem shall go a remnant, and out of Mount Zion a band of survivors. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Therefore thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, He shall not come into the city, or shoot an arrow there or come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege mound against it. By the way that he came, by the same way he shall return, and he shall not come into the city, declares the Lord. For I will defend the city to save it, for my own sake, and for the sake of my servant David. Okay, awesome response here. So just moving through it pretty quick here, because we're running towards the end here. Basically, this is this is God's message to Syria, which is basically boils down to y'all messed up, big. You done messed up, Assyria, and you're gonna really be sorry. So he says, she scorns you, the virgin daughter of Zion. She wags her head behind you, the daughter of Jerusalem. So God is now taunting Sennacherib, saying, the women of Jerusalem mock you and despise you. And of course, back then, in the context of warfare, in general, women were considered powerless or useless in warfare, even though they weren't. So you got to kind of put yourself into that mindset. Now this would be a very problematic kind of thing to say, in the very least. But this would have been a great insult to them, that the virgin daughters of Jerusalem mock you, O great king of Assyria. You've mocked the Holy One of Israel. You've mocked the Lord, and you've boasted of yourself. You said, "Oh, I've got all these forces. I've conquered so many lands. I've just steamrolled over everything, and I've done all these great things." And you're boasting about all this. And I love where God says, so He says, "Oh, you boasted all this," and He says, "Haven't you heard? I determined all of this long ago. You have done nothing without me allowing it to happen, me ordaining it to happen. You have no reason to boast. Nothing. There's not a thing you've done that I have not ordained, that I have not made happen." And now you come around here throwing your weight around thinking you're going to start something up. And no, it's not going to happen. And then he says, "I know you're sitting down and you're going, I know everything about you, Sennacherib. I know every little detail. I know exactly what you're doing. You can't hide from me." It's this really crazy, awesome threat. I mean, it's not even a threat. I mean, it's a promise. God is like, "You have threatened me and my people. I don't threat." I bring the hammer down, and it's a coming. It's this awesome little ooh, it just got real. God is coming. Oh, it's not like it'll be good for you, Assyria. So yeah, he has come. I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will turn like an animal. God is going to come, like Assyria is coming, like this huge force, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're going to take over." God is going to treat them like an animal of the field and just be like, boop, boop, toss them back where they came from. And then this part here about this shall be a sign for you. This is for Hezekiah. And he's basically saying it's going to be rough for you for 3 years. Because as part of the invasion of Assyria coming in, basically what happened was they devastated all the crops. I mean, all the crop, they destroyed an entire year's crop for Israel. And then so with this whole thing going on, they've made planting a new crop impossible. So for this first year, their current crops are gone. Okay, boom. So they're not going to have. You shall eat what grows for itself. So whatever you can manage to grow out of whatever, that's what you're going to eat. The second year, whatever springs from that. The second year, because you'll be able to plant crops, but they won't be ready to harvest for that second year. The third year, though, things will be back to normal. So, God is saying this is, I'm going to come, I'm going to destroy Assyria, but understand, for you guys, it's going to be rough for the next 3 years. So, trust in me. It's kind of like this trust in me. I am going to deliver you, and it's going to be rough, but you need to trust in me. And then at the very end here, for I will defend the city to save it for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. Which, right in the back of your head, should be Jesus, the son of David. So why is he defending the city? Why is Jerusalem so crucially important to Yahweh? I mean, he's the God of heavens and the earth. He is the God of everything. All the land is his. What is so important about Jerusalem? The son of David, the Messiah, Jesus. He's going to die there. He's going to be crucified on the cross. Right there. So for the sake of him, which means for the sake of all people, for the forgiveness of sins, for resurrection, for salvation, for all this, that is why he will defend this place. So the promise of protection and deliverance is all working for the greater purpose of Jesus Christ to come and bring salvation. So, perfect, awesome stuff. All right, and then the last couple verses here, 3 verses. So that's what happens. This is what God delivers as a message. And the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh. And as he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch, his god, Adramelech and Sharezer, his sons, struck him down with the sword. And after they escaped into the land of Ararat, Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his place. So, God sends the angel of the Lord and strikes down 185,000 overnight. And they wake up and, they're just decimated. And it is so jarring, so they're so freaked out that they just leave. They've won victory after victory after. It's been like steamrolling into Judah. And they wake up one morning and they're like, "Oh, we're out. We're gone. We're going home. Nope, this is not gonna happen." God comes through and just lays waste to the army, and Now so he returns home and he stays there, and he's assassinated by his own sons while he's praying in his God's temple. He's there in the house of his God, and his sons assassinate him with a sword, fulfilling what God said: "I will strike you down with the sword of your sons in your own land." That assassination won't come for 20 more years. So once he leaves, 20 years later, Sennacherib is assassinated. So there's also this element of God's timing. God promises these things, but it happens in his timing. It's not necessarily going to be boom right here and right now, or the next day or the next. 20 years from now, it comes to fruition. And the fun contrast here, ultimately at the end of this chapter, is we have Hezekiah, the king, who goes into the temple of his God to pray. And his God, Yahweh, our God, the one true God, delivers his people, is true to his promise, and delivers that. Sennacherib went to his temple. The king of Assyria goes to his temple and prays. But his God wasn't able to save him, because there was no God. It was emptiness, nothing. And he was killed by his own sons. So the kind of the period at the end of the sentence of this chapter is: the Lord is God. He alone is God. He is the only one. He is trustworthy, faithful, true. He is the one to trust and rely on. End of story. Comment here. Why is Nineveh important? Because it was a big city? I don't, it happened to be, it seems to pop up every now and then. Well, yeah, it's just kind of, it was a prominent city, in the ancient world. So, it'd be the same kind of thing how, like, Jerusalem pops up quite a bit. It was the prominent city of Israel, of Judah. So, Nineveh, it's a big city, important city in the ancient world. Other than that, I don't think there's any kind of special other or divine significance or anything like that. It just so happens to be that was where he was. So, all right, well, that is chapters 36 and 37. So we went a little bit long tonight. Apologize, but we had a lot to get through, and I wanted to make sure we got through both chapters. So, any closing thoughts, questions, comments? Okay. Just thinking back to Jonah. Well, yeah. If you want to assign some kind of theological significance here, you could look to Jonah. When he went to Nineveh, they were representative of the worst of God's enemies. Just these vile, terrible people who were nobody wanted anything to do with because they were just evil, and yet God has mercy on them. So the king of Assyria running back to Nineveh, just again being a representative of God's enemies, and how he finds no peace. He is he is not saved because he does not turn to Yahweh. He turns to his own gods. So I think that's probably the only connection really that you could probably make with that. All right. Any other questions? I think my mom was the only one talking online tonight. So, I guess, I mean, this stuff, the narrative portions are a lot more straightforward. So, honestly, there's probably not that much to discuss about it. But no, good stuff. All right. Well, if that is all, then we're going to call it a night. So thank you for bearing with me for a little bit longer session tonight. Good stuff. Really fun. Fun bit of. It's always fun when God brings out the big guns and lays a smackdown on some people. It's always entertaining. It's kind of like when God talks to Job and he's like, "Who are you to talk to me?" It's like, cool. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for sticking with me tonight. And we will continue with chapter 38 next week. So until then, it's been a pleasure and hope you have. June says it's lots more fun to read with you. Well, thank you, June. See, maybe in the future we should do like a Zoom session so at least I can see everybody. And maybe we can interact a little bit more. That I might be persuaded to do that, even though I was fundamentally against using Zoom for anything before. I didn't want any more Zoom meetings. We'll think about it. All right. Anyway, have a great, wonderful night. Have a great rest of this week, and until next week, peace be with you.